February 25th, 2018, the United Nations Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner sent a memorandum to members of the Judiciary for the State of Hawaii, informing Hawaii Circuit Court judges that the lawful political status of the Hawaiian Islands is that of a sovereign nation-state in continuity, but a nation-state that is under a strange form of occupation by the United States, resulting from an illegal military occupation and a fraudulent annexation.
Also happening today, Hawaii County Council member Jen Ruggles will hold a public meeting on her decision not to vote on legislation until she's assured she's not committing war crimes.
A world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations.
At the end of this, I felt fairly disillusioned as an American and as someone that was raised to believe in democracy and the identity that the United States has established as being a nation that honors the rule of law.
The cornerstone of our democracy, the rule of law.
The Security Council has been increasingly outspoken and demanding of respect for human rights and international humanitarian law. This is important, but the challenge that remains is a familiar one: follow through.
If we want to continue on this earth, and when you think of the existence of atomic weapons, which could easily annihilate us, we should give much more of our attention to the law. It's the only way.
For me, in my own ideal world, I like to think the world still matters. The law still matters, right? Principle matters, integrity matters. When I call the police department, I would hope that they show up. You know, like, I hope the law matters.
For our values of tolerance and equality and opportunity, for universal rights and the rule of law.
Last month, Ruggles refused to vote after receiving a copy of a memo from a United Nations independent expert calling Hawaii a sovereign nation state under occupation by the United States. Ruggles has asked the County Council for clarification on criminal liability under U.S. and international law.
I researched President Cleveland's addresses to Congress. I read the various reports to him from his investigators and the treaties between the Hawaiian Kingdom and the United States. So Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution says, treaties shall be the supreme law of the land. And the second paragraph describes how all representatives and legislators shall be bound by oath to support this Constitution. And that is where my oath comes from, to support and defend the United States Constitution.
So what does this mean for my job now? Considering that he did not dispute that Hawaii is illegally occupied, this means that Corporation Counsel has forced me into the position of being a whistleblower.
In her first community meeting since her announcement, Ruggles said she was putting Hawaii institutions on notice.
Do the primary source research, and you find out, and it's not my interpretation of the Constitution, it's Thomas Cooley's interpretation of the Constitution, the foremost authority on constitutional law in the U.S. So historically, that taking of Hawaii in 1898 was illegal. There was no justification behind it, and there was no annexation.
There's a legal principle called the poisonous fruit doctrine, right? And the poisonous fruit doctrine basically says that you can only get a legal fruit from a legal tree, right? If you have an illegal tree, you will start to bear illegal fruit.
Much of Hawaiian history is based on illegality.
Agenda tonight, a most significant presidential apology. At the White House yesterday, President Clinton signed a formal letter of apology to the people of Hawaii. He was apologizing on behalf of the U.S. government for the government's involvement 100 years ago in removing the independent Hawaiian monarchy by force.
Now, in the case of Hawaii, it's very interesting. Hawaii was the first non-Western state to be recognized by the world community, as we said before, in 1843. Once you're so recognized, you cannot be colonized anymore. So an independent state cannot be colonized, according to the Charter of the United Nations.
Guided by principle, not by politics. He will be faithful to the law, pursuing justice without favor.
The rule of law at its, to put it kind of crudely, is simply the idea that ideas are above rulers, that a constitution is above a king or above a president, that the values that a country shares are more important than the personalities that rule it.
The rule of law.
For universal rights and the rule of law.
He will be faithful to the law.
Follow through.
But the rule of law is the tool which can be used by those who speak truth to power.
My name is Jen Ruggles, and I was born on the Big Island and raised in Puna. Upon graduating high school, I attended Hawaii Community College and became involved in a club on campus. It was a joint club at the University of Hawaii and the Hawaii Community College, and it was called Global Hope. I organized rallies for different political campaigns. We brought in speakers. I've also worked as a community organizer for a nonprofit called Pesticide Action Network North America, where they hired me to help organize in Kauai to pass a bill that would provide greater pesticide protections there. And this was because Kauai, on the west side of the island, is surrounded with agrochemical GMO operations, where there's whole towns and communities being blanketed in pesticide-laden dust.
There's about $500,000 of money from GMO companies and lobbyists in their campaign funds. So that's $200,000 in the Senate and $212,000 in the House and $20,900 in the governor's. Now, if you add in the two wives and the daughter of just two top GMO lobbyists, those figures nearly double.
When a big business gives a politician money, they're making an investment, and they get a return on that investment in the way that politician votes and the laws they introduce.
My son has a condition called gastrocesis. Basically, the stomach's on the outside when he's born. So I had to fly her up to Arizona. I've been without it for 2 months working, trying to figure out, what causes this, all this different kind of research. I've been doing it just on my own, and I came across 4 other friends of mine that had the same condition. It's been more commonly found in the islands of Hawaii. And there have been several studies and scientists who directed gastrocesis. With a chemical called astrazenes, they're doing some, I'll have to provide my resources, and they say that the chemical is sprayed more here on this island than anywhere else in the world. I'm just speaking on behalf of my girlfriend and my unborn son. I don't blame anybody, but I just want to stop the poisoning.
The reason I ran for office was not only because people had been asking me based on my work on Kauai and my work at the college previously. It was also because in my experience in working on these campaigns, I saw how that one vote on the lawmaking body can make a world of difference. It can really make or break whether or not a law can negatively impact or positively impact the rules that we all have to live by. It's the power of laws being compromised by the influence of big business interests. I was experienced in how to manage a campaign, enough to where I felt competent that we might be able to actually win. So we ran a really highly organized grassroots campaign, and a lot of it was based around me going door to door. I'm talking about driveways that are half a mile to a mile apart on roads that a lot of the times you need four-wheel drive to get through. They're so narrow, they scratch your car up, and people are living in tents. I won by 302 votes, and I was very relieved because a lot of people worked really hard on my campaign, and I was relieved that they had a win and that we had a win. One of the first things that I did when I was in office was introduce a resolution for $15 million from the state that they had passed in a previous budget to be expedited to our Hawaii County Department for our roads. Because when I went door to door, the #1 issue was roads and transportation. The second thing that I did was introduce a resolution so it legalized tiny homes and made a pathway for tiny homes in Hawaii. Because we were getting a new mayor that year and a new administration, our mayor decided that he wanted to cancel a composting contract that the previous administration had set up. I worked really hard on this with the rest of the other council members, and we pushed back against the administration and got them to move forward with the composting facility so that the public can be provided with compost. Another win was I was actually that swing vote for a bill that would ban styrofoam in Hawaii County. So while I was in office, I attended a lot of different conferences. So this conference that I went to was called La Ho'iho'i Ea, and it was about a year into office, and it featured various academics and PhDs that specialized in the history and legal and political world of Hawaii, from before the United States was here to after. One of the presentations that stood out to me was by a man named Dr. Keanu Sai, and his presentation focused on the legal history of Hawaii and basically outlined how, according to international law, Hawaii was never legally made a part of the United States. Then naturally, this flustered me and confused me because being born and raised here, I mean, everything that I have been taught is that we are a part of the United States. We are that 50th star on the flag. And if it wasn't actually done legally, why isn't anybody talking about it?
What happened in 1893, okay, on January 16th?
All of the history books say the missionaries were essentially in control since they came. They arrived in 1820 and they did this, and this to us, and it's been all downhill ever since. And Keanu asked the question, if the missionaries were in control since 1820, why did they have to overthrow themselves in 1893? Simple question, profound answer, right? Because in that answer, you have to then acknowledge that, well, then maybe they weren't in as much control as we thought they were.
Keanu's dissertation that he completed in 2008, that was also, I think, a leaping point, a launching point for my dissertation topic on the topic of citizenship. Keanu's dissertation had laid out this legal and political history of Hawaii, particularly as it relates to the evolution of its constitutional system, but also the evolution of its international character, right? And it really focused and paid quite a bit of attention to the significance of Hawaiian independence on November 20th, 1843.
I remember the moment when I realized that the political status of Hawaii was one of an occupied state. After Keanu Sai had spoken to my classes, and so he made a good argument that Hawaii's annexation was illegal. Then after the class, we were sitting in the lounge, and I said, Hawaii's annexation was illegal, so what is all of this? Meaning the state government, the state capitol, the military, the Department of Education, all of it. And he said, occupation. And that was a light bulb. That's all I needed to hear was the word occupation, because I knew what that word meant.
What Keanu brought was this understanding that the movement before had been a movement to break away from the United States and have some kind of special place. And what he showed was Hawaii never was part of the United States.
Right? No more assumptions, no more, yes, but this relies on this being true, which relies on this being true, which break it down to the bottom, right? And that's kind of what Keanu, I don't know, knowingly or unknowingly was doing in that class, was breaking down our assumptions. Well, we assumed the missionaries were in control. Well, why do you think that? I don't know. That's just the story I've heard.
Right, a lot of that work that Keanu has done, his scholarship has shown us that blueprint of the 19th century of what Hawaii looked like as an independent state, and it projected a future at the same time, right? To say, this is how it operated when Hawaii was an independent state, and this is how it could operate in a future.
The expert on all of this difference between colonization and occupation and the status of independent states and how an independent state can be annexed, because there's a way to do that. The foremost expert here is Keanu Sai.
Well, what I thought I knew was that Hawaii was a part of the United States and I'm in the Army. I'm in the field artillery. I began to realize then that what I thought I knew, all of a sudden was not relevant anymore. Because what I found out, just from my military perspective, what happened in 1893, January 17th, was an illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom government, not the country. I knew in the intel briefs that we received from Desert Storm, there was a puppet government there set up by Iraq called the Provisional Government of Kuwait. And here I'm looking at Hawaii, these guys are calling themselves the Provisional Government of Hawaii. And then later, that Provisional Government of Kuwait, I knew, changed its name to the Republic of Kuwait. And that's exactly what the Provisional Government did of Hawaii. They changed its name to the Republic of Hawaii, and then asked to be annexed, just as the Republic of Kuwait was asking to be annexed.
Iraq and its leaders must be held liable for these crimes of abuse and destruction.
And they were disguising themselves to be Kuwaitis, when in fact they were Iraqi nationals. And they called themselves the Provisional Government of Kuwait. I'm serious, I'm not gonna make this stuff up. And then they later changed their name to the Republic of Kuwait. And they asked Iraq to annex them. And then they annexed them and it became a province of Kuwait, of Iraq. I am not lying.
Is a redoubling of Saddam Hussein's efforts to destroy completely Kuwait and its people.
And then, just as Iraq unilaterally seized Kuwait and said, you're annexed, that's the same thing that the United States did in 1898 in a joint resolution of Congress saying, we annexed you. The parallels were unbelievable. And I quickly saw Hawaii's situation just because of my experience with the first Gulf War. I didn't really understand how a country can become a part of another country. I would only find that out later. But I knew Hawaii was not part of the United States and that we're occupied. And that just as Iraq was not complying with the law of occupation, the Hague and Geneva Conventions. The United States was not complying with the law of occupation either. So where Iraq occupied Kuwait for 7.5 months. I'm looking at this situation back in 1992, almost a century of occupation. And that's when I began to realize I might be in the wrong army.
Kuwait is liberated. Iraq's army is defeated. Our military objectives are met. Kuwait is once more in the hands of Kuwaitis in control of their own destiny. We share in their joy, a joy tempered only by our compassion for their ordeal. Tonight, the Kuwaiti flag once again flies above the capital of a free and sovereign nation.
So there can be no question about it. There's no statute of limitation.
Although the constitutional monarchy comes into place in 1839 under the Declaration of Rights, or one might say in 1840 with the first constitution, it's really Kamehameha I, through many of his policies, that's already starting to separate out his absolute powers. Right? You have to understand that Kamehameha I comes from a line of Ali'i, in which the mo'i is the absolute ruler. What he says or what she says goes. Kamehameha is one of the first to start to separate or divide out some of his powers, right? And you can start to see that come into fruition when Kamehameha III, Kauikeuli, begins to develop the constitutional monarchy.
Kauikeuli sees the furthering of colonization in the Pacific. The Spanish are going to take the Marquesas. The French are going to take French Polynesia. The Germans are looking at Samoa. You know, all these places are being gobbled up, and he's not stupid. He knows Hawaii's next. Hawaii's strategically right between the United States, the west coast of the United States, and Japan. So there's no question Hawaii was coming to be taken. It would have been taken. The only way he can prevent that is to gain recognition as an equal from these other countries. Impossible, no way. They're a tiny little country in the middle of nowhere. How are they going to gain recognition from these other countries? It's never been done before by a non-European nation, but he's got to try. So he starts to build, with help and with guidance, a nation and a constitution and all these things that will be recognized. So 30 years ago, the narrative was the white man came, imposed his form of government on Hawaii, and then took over. Well, Kamana Beamer and others in the field have shown, no, this was purposeful. Again, Hawaii would have been a foreign nation by the 1850s if this hadn't happened. But he understands what he needs to do. He turns to his nation into a constitutional monarchy to save it.
Hawaii was looking around the Pacific and seeing that other countries were being colonized. So he sent Ambassador Timoteo Ha'alilio, Secretary William Richards, and then Assistant Ambassador George Simpson.
They meet with the representatives from France and from England. And on November 28th, 1843, they gain recognition from England and France as a sovereign and independent nation. And that's huge. That became a national holiday throughout the kingdom. But that day, La Ku'ukoa, Independence Day, November 28th, 1843, the France and England signed a declaration recognizing Hawaii as an independent and sovereign co-equal. So every power that England had, every right that France had, America had, Hawaii now had. And it was the first non-European nation in the world to achieve that. No other nation in Oceania did. You know, you think about nations, you think about Japan. Japan gained international recognition in 1893. Hawaii was 50 years prior to that. So it was really an incredible achievement, and it puts Hawaii at that table of nations as an equal.
Now, in the case of Hawaii, it's very interesting. Hawaii was the first non-Western state to be recognized by the world community, as we said before, in 1843. Once you're so recognized, you cannot be colonized anymore.
By the 1890s, the Hawaiian Kingdom has over 100 embassies and legations throughout the world. It has peace treaties, right? It has a treaty of neutrality. It has friendship and commerce treaties with literally every other single country in the world. Citizenship in the Hawaiian Kingdom was never based on blood quantum, or was never based around any notions of race, right? In contrast, in the 1840s in the United States, in order to acquire American citizenship, at that time you had to be a white male. And that prerequisite of being white actually stays within the regulations of US citizenship for almost another 100 years, right? Racially inclusive citizenship laws in Hawaii are being passed 120 years before the American Civil Rights Movement takes place in the 1970s, right? Are a number of examples of former slaves escaping the grips of slavery in America, finding their way to the shores of Hawaii, naturalizing, right? Becoming a Hawaiian subject, and being afforded all the rights and privileges therein, right? Mind you, these are former slaves coming from an American system that is based on ideologies of white supremacy.
The Hawaiian monarch, at a certain point, declares neutrality in the Crimean-Russian War. Hawaii as a nation, a co-sovereign equal, claiming neutrality in this Crimean-Russian war, forced the other nations of the world to start to say, well, what does that mean? What are neutrality laws internationally? And they hadn't been really developed that well. Keanu has written a great article about the development of neutrality laws around the world, and that was sparked by this claiming from the Hawaiian Kingdom. So the Hawaiian Kingdom kind of is at the forefront of developing international law on neutrality. You have, by the 1860s, mid-60s, Hawaii almost as a universally literate nation. And that's incredible. I mean, we know that literacy was probably well over 90%. That's written, by the missionaries, that's written by everyone saying it's a nearly universally literate nation. So somewhere around 90 to 95% literacy. At the same time in the US, the literacy rate was around 70%. In many countries, it was around 30%. The Kingdom of Hawaii had one of the most literate nations, was one of the most literate nations in the world. They produced one of the most prolific newspaper scenes. They had over 100 Hawaiian language newspapers published in the 19th century. We have 125,000 pages of thought and news in the newspapers. In 1861, there's a beautiful newspaper that's put out by Kanu Pepukuokoa, a new newspaper, and it's on January 1st, and they have a color Hawaiian flag on the front of the newspaper. It's in red, white, and blue. That was the first printing of a color flag in any newspaper anywhere in the world. That was 30 years before the use of color in a US newspaper. That was Hawaiians in the Kingdom of Hawaii doing that. 1870s, 1880s, you have Kalakaua setting many firsts, first monarch to circumnavigate the globe. You have him when he's in Paris. He hears about a demonstration of a new invention going on, a street-side demonstration. So he goes and he sees this demonstration, and it's the light bulb. It's Thomas Edison. And so he meets Edison. On his way back to Hawaii, he stops in New York City and meets with him at his offices and contracts to have electricity brought to Hawaii. And Iolani Palace is lit with electricity by Edison's folks long before the White House is. I mean, the US White House, the Buckingham Palace had electricity after Hawaii did it at its State House. There's another kind of cute story about the fact that when electricity did go into the White House in the US, the president was scared of it and wouldn't use it. He thought it was magic.
Much of Hawaiian history is based on illegality, right? The illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom government in 1893, right? Here we sit on January 18th. Yesterday, the anniversary of the overthrow of the Hawaiian government, January 17th. The illegal overthrow of the government. Illegal annexation in 1898. The Bayonet Constitution in 1887, right? All of these illegalities then created narratives, stories, mo'olelo. Because how do you justify, I'm going to go and take all your camera equipment, theft, stealing. How do you justify that? Oh, well, it was really mine to begin with. It's in KCC, right? I work here, you don't. This is my stuff. You have to create this narrative because otherwise it's illegal, you're a crook.
They have meetings, they have, what are we going to do, and so forth. And they really come to this conclusion that we've been monkeying around with this too long. We've got to take power. We can't just take the constitutional power, we've got to take power. And that's where they come up with this idea of the overthrow. Now, their plans are supported by the fact that Hawaii has a new U.S. minister sent to Hawaii. And that minister is John Stevens. John Stevens was the son of a Congregationalist preacher who was an ardent annexationist. Stevens had tried to get Nicaragua annexed to the United States when he was ambassador of Nicaragua. And he wrote letters saying, the Hawaiian pear is fully ripe, now is the time for us to pluck it. And he wrote all these kind of letters about pushing for annexation. And he's got friends in Washington and so forth. So he's pushing this idea of annexation, and he starts meeting with Lauren Thurston and Sanford Dole and those guys, telling them, well, if you're going to do it, this is how you do it. And he lays it out for them. You're going to take over, I'm going to recognize you as legitimate, you're going to send a treaty of annexation, it's going to be signed. So the U.S. minister asks Captain Wiltz to land U.S. troops to, quote, protect American lives and property. He says things are going crazy. There's going to be warfare, there's going to be bloodshed, and so forth. Now, we know that not to be true. From the testimony from lots of other folks, they say the town was quiet. Marshal Stevens, the Hawaiian marshal, had closed all the bars early in the afternoon. They had a ball at the palace that night. So the Royal Hawaiian Band is on the lawn of the palace, and people are walking around, and there's nothing going wrong. They bring up this scare tactic to bring ashore U.S. troops. Now, an important international note, that act is a violation of international law. Remember, Hawaii is a sovereign nation. We can't decide tomorrow we want to go land troops in Japan without the Japanese permission. It's a violation of their sovereignty. And Henry Cooper, who's one of the Committee of 13, goes up on the steps of the the executive building, and he reads a proclamation. The new president, who's just been elected, Grover Cleveland, comes into power and says, what are we doing? Wait a minute. We have a treaty with Hawaii, perpetual peace and friendship. They're a legitimate sovereign nation. How are we annexing them? What happened? We don't even know what happened. So he pulls that treaty of annexation from the Congress, and it dies. And so on December 18th, 1893, President Cleveland addresses the U.S. Congress and gives a speech. It's required reading for anybody who wants to understand the problems with the annexation. So this isn't a Hawaiian sovereignty activist. This isn't a historian. This is the President of the United States. The President of the United States says, what has happened in Hawaii is an act of war, quote, act of war. Any regard for our national character demands that we must fix this. The President of the United States sends a new minister, Minister Willis, to Hawaii, and he's going to negotiate with the Queen for her restoration. This is U.S. policy. So the Queen agrees, Willis agrees, and we have an agreement made between the President of the United States and the Queen. Unfortunately, the next step is for Minister Willis to notify the provisional government. The President of the United States has decided to restore the Queen. What happened was illegal, it shouldn't have happened, our forces were involved and we shouldn't have been involved, so therefore it's our responsibility to make it right. So we're going to have you step down and bring her back. And Thurston says, no. He says, I think they're bluffing. I don't think they're going to use U.S. troops to reinstate the Queen. I don't think the President has the guts to do that. I don't think he has the political will to do that. And Thurston's side wins out. And they sandbag the palace and they say, we're going to fight. And he's right. The President of the United States has not given Willis the power to use military to have this agreement instilled. And so we have a stalemate. The provisional government knows they need a permanent government, a semi-permanent government, but they're still going to push for annexation. And so they're going to create a Republic of Hawaii, supposedly republic. A republic is the most democratic form of government, but they're going to call it that. Thousands of American troops are being sent to the Philippines to fight this war, and Hawaii is the coaling station. It's right dead set in the middle of California, Philippines. And so Hawaii becomes incredibly strategic militarily. So in Congress, there's a new debate about annexation. And they say we've got to take Hawaii. Hawaiians respond with an incredible, amazing treaty of protest of the Treaty of Annexation. It starts from the women's group in Hilo coming out with this Ku'e petition, this petition against annexation. And they are so eloquent. They say, we are not a herd of cattle. We don't want to be bartered away. We are a nation, we are a people, and we deserve independence. We've been independent, give it back to us. William Richardson, Auld, Kalao Kalani, and Kaulia, these 4 Hawaiian gentlemen, are appointed by the Queen to take this petition to Washington, and they do. And they present it to the Congress. Senator Hoare presents it on the floor of the Congress. I mean, and what a dramatic thing, you know, you're standing in the US Congress, this bastion of equality and governance and freedom and democracy, saying, hey, what's the problem here? We're free, you can't steal us. And it's such a profound message, and it's such an honest message that it works. The people of Hawaii defeated the Treaty of Annexation in 1898, the second one. They beat it, they won. What happened after that was that the senators who were against annexation were saying, I'm not changing my vote. Like, we're not supporting annexation. It's theft of a nation. And the military folks said, we have to have it. We absolutely have to have it. It's a military necessity. Nope, I'm not changing my vote. And so a treaty takes a 2/3 vote, because it's an important thing. You're transferring sovereignty. So it's not a simple majority, it's a 2/3 vote, and they can't get the 2/3 vote. So Senator Newlands from Nevada proposes an idea. And he says, well, we're going to take it. We have to. And so he proposes a joint resolution of Congress, because a joint resolution of Congress only takes a 50% vote. Problem is, joint resolution of Congress doesn't annex territory. A joint resolution of Congress is an internal law of the United States. It affects, you know, anything in the United States. The only thing that can go beyond the America's borders is a treaty. So they draft a resolution purporting to annex Hawaii, and they pass this resolution because they get more than 50% vote, and they declare Hawaii annexed. Didn't happen. Do the primary source research, and you find out, and it's not my interpretation of the Constitution, it's Thomas Cooley's interpretation of the Constitution, the foremost authority on constitutional law in the U.S. So historically, that taking of Hawaii in 1898 was illegal. There was no justification behind it, and there was no annexation. And so you have, you know, in every overthrow, in every invasion, in every occupation, you have a cycle of resistance. Yeah, you have immediate resistance, and then you have kind of the downfall, and then you have kind of this underground resistance. You know, these people maybe not fighting politically, but doing and so forth. And to nip that in the bud, to change that, they had to. I mean, how do you turn 40,000 native Hawaiians and other subjects of the Kingdom of Hawaii? How do you turn them into American citizens in their own minds?
Following the fraudulent annexation in 1898, the American government implemented a plan to obliterate the national identity of the Hawaiian people by imposing forced Americanization through public school education programs. Samuel Mills Damon was Vice President of the Provisional Government, Minister of Finance for the Republic of Hawaii, and as a trustee of Kamehameha's schools, he played a major role in Americanizing Hawaiian nationals. Damon wrote, "If we are ever to have peace and annexation, the first thing to do is to obliterate the past."
So in that context, my own grandmother is born when the Queen is still alive, right? So we're talking about a history that is not that far away, right? So how is it that we forgot so quickly, right? Or did we forget? Or did somebody, you know what I mean, the more common political terminology for today is denationalization, right? How is it that somebody made us forget our national history?
In 1906, the government of the Territory of Hawaii circulated a pamphlet titled Program for Patriotic Exercises in the Public Schools. The theme of the program was to indoctrinate the children of the Hawaiian Islands to be American and to speak English. February 16th, 1907, an article in Harper's Weekly magazine titled Hawaii's Lesson to Headstrong California. This scene shows the salute to the American flag, which flies in the grounds of the Kaiulani Public School, which has many Japanese pupils. The drill is constantly held as a means of inculcating patriotism in the hearts of the children. We give our heads and our hearts to God and our country, one language, one flag.
And a lot of trouble, which we have today, stems from there. Most of all, the loss of the language. There was just in the newspaper, Saturday edition, there's always an excellent article in the Hawaiian language. And the author, who is a teacher of Hawaiian here, professor of Hawaiian, points out that the overthrow also meant that the language was overthrown. And the language, of course, is now coming back by fits and starts, but it's coming back. But you know, when the people lose their language, you have untold trouble as a result of that.
The author Donald James Wheel offers some perspective. When a well-packaged web of lies has been sold gradually to the masses over generations, the truth will seem utterly preposterous and its speaker a raving lunatic.
Regency is to serve in the absence of a monarch. Queen Liliuokalani died in 1917 without a successor to the throne. So in 1996, we formed the Regency. It was formed in similar fashion to governments in exile during World War II, when they were formed in London. It's by necessity, right? Doctrine of necessity. Something we used to do in the Army. A private can become a lieutenant in time of war. If everyone in the chain of command was killed, that private would have to assume the chain of command, not by choice, but by obligation. My job as part of the Regency was to expose Hawaii's occupation by explaining the laws. So I would travel to outer islands, as well as Oahu, different places, different venues, and I would just say, these are Hawaiian Kingdom laws. I would have Xerox copies of the Hawaiian Civil Code, the Penal Code. My job was to just expose. One particular presentation that I gave regarding the Hawaiian Kingdom's existence and the obligation to follow Hawaiian Kingdom law, in particular, Section 6 of the Hawaiian Civil Code, specifically says that the laws are obligatory upon all persons, whether subjects of this kingdom or any citizen of a foreign state, while within the limits of this kingdom. Meaning, if you're a Hawaiian subject or you're a citizen from another country here, you got to follow Hawaiian Kingdom law, just as it's an obligation to follow laws in other countries, right? So in this presentation I gave at Kea'au on the island of Hawaii, outside of Hilo, there was a person in the audience named Lance Larson. And after my presentation, he took it upon himself to find out whether or not, and he bought some law books on whether or not a driver's license is needed. So logic would tell you that there were no automobiles at that time, let alone in the kingdom. So there were no laws regulating driving an automobile, right? So the laws on driver's licenses is an American law. That's state of Hawaii law. And he took off his license plates and he puts on the back of his Jeep Comanche truck, a big placard restating Section 6 of the Hawaiian Civil Code, the obligation of Hawaiian Kingdom laws upon all persons. So he got a lot of tickets. That's what he was trying to get. I guess he was trying to protest in his own way. And when he went to court, he was represented by an attorney, Miss Ninia Parks. And Ninia, she knew me and I knew her. And she asked if I could serve as an expert witness in his case. So I flew to the Big Island, and I was accepted as an expert witness on Hawaiian Kingdom law by the judge. At that time, the judge's name was Judge Sandra Schutte. So I explained everything, that Hawaii's occupied. And at that point, I knew there was no treaty. The only way that you can be a part of another country is you have a treaty. We don't have a treaty. What happened then, Judge Schutte went into her chambers. She said, when she came out of the chambers, she said, I'm going to fine you. And it was roughly $900. And then she follows up with a question to Mr. Larson. Are you going to pay this? He said, no, you didn't show me the treaty. And that's when she ordered him to be incarcerated for 30 days, 7 of those 30 days in solitary confinement. Now that was big, because what Nenia Parks thought at that time was that her client might be beaten in the prison. How do you get 30 days? And 7 of those 30 days are in solitary confinement because you're just asking the right questions and standing on a law. He wasn't violent. So what ends up happening is I'm in the Regency for the Hawaiian government. And she now tells me, after her client was taken away, she's saying that the Council of Regency is responsible for the violation of the rights of her client because we're supposed to be protecting Hawaiian subjects from the unlawful imposition of American law. I said, no, you're right. We are responsible, but we're not liable because we're occupied. It's not the Hawaiian government that administers Hawaiian Kingdom law during occupations. It's the United States. They haven't, and we don't have any effectiveness. We're just exposing the occupation to ensure compliance. So what ends up happening is she files a lawsuit in U.S. federal court in Honolulu. Lance Larson versus the Hawaiian Kingdom and the United States of America. And she's trying to get her client out of prison under a writ of habeas corpus. So she filed a complaint for injunctive relief. And I said to her, I said, this federal court in Honolulu is just as illegal as that state of Hawaii court in Kea'au, where your client was incarcerated. They're all established by American law. I said, why don't we do this? So I recommended to her, dismiss the United States and get them off the docket. Leave us on, and we will enter into a binding arbitration agreement with you so that we could leapfrog jurisdiction from federal court in Honolulu to the Permanent Court of Arbitration in the Netherlands, in The Hague. Because the Permanent Court of Arbitration, it has jurisdiction over international disputes, namely occupations, violation of certain treaties. So we ended up entering into a binding arbitration agreement with her. Judge Samuel King signed off on the arbitration, and it leapfrogged from Honolulu to The Hague in the Netherlands. So Lance Larson is the plaintiff, or what is called the claimant, and we're the defendant, but the Hawaiian Kingdom has to exist as a state before the Permanent Court of Arbitration can form an arbitral tribunal to resolve the dispute that we have with Mr. Larson. So from November of 1999 until February of 2000, the Permanent Court of Arbitration Secretariat, the registry, was doing their due diligence. What they were doing was looking into whether or not the Hawaiian Kingdom exists as a state. Now, right off the bat, you would think they should have no problem because Hawaii supposedly is the 50th state. But remember, this is an international body, and they're looking at international laws. They're not looking at American laws that says Hawaii is a part of the United States. So the first thing that needed to be determined was whether or not the Hawaiian Kingdom did exist as an independent state before the U.S. invasion and overthrow of the Hawaiian government. And Hawaii had a treaty with the Netherlands. So that's the indication that Hawaii is an independent state, or was an independent state, before 1893.
Sometimes you get too close to the tree, you lose sight of the forest. And the forest is the nation, and that's what we always have to look at. How is this nation born? How does it continue to exist? And I think that's the discipline. That's where we have to stay on that path. This is a culmination of all of that research, all of those efforts. And we're talking about a lot of pain, talking about a lot of joy. This is the history of our people for the last 150 years.
Lance Larson filed this case as a subject of the Hawaiian Kingdom, taking it for granted that his rights as a Hawaiian national are intact, and that his country, while occupied, the sovereignty remains intact. At all times during the pleadings, he has been operating, assuming that as a matter of fact and law, he is a Hawaiian national. The respondent in this case, the acting government of the Hawaiian Kingdom, has also at all times maintained as a matter of fact that the Hawaiian Kingdom is a sovereign nation, albeit an occupied sovereign nation.
Rather, what we find is that the United States has never expressed itself as an occupier. Who would? It will never admit to occupation. But yet, to admit to occupation is in a sense to admit to the continued existence of the Hawaiian Kingdom as an independent state, which is really the crux of the matter, which is actually what is holding up, you might say, this issue to be resolved. Thus, the legal order, thus the reestablishment of the government, thus the relationship between its nationals.
An arbitration panel could well decide that based upon the information we have, which we feel is satisfactory, that we believe as a matter of international law, it appears to us that this occupation is illegal.
In this document, the United States Department of Justice, which on the first page acknowledges that this comes from the United States Department of Justice, acknowledges that a joint resolution alone is insufficient to acquire another nation. Other exhibits in the memorial show that both the sovereign of the Hawaiian Kingdom, Queen Liliuokalani, and many of her subjects, through the petition against annexation, were not only deprived of a right to vote and acquiesce into becoming a part of the United States. In fact, they adamantly protested on the record and sent those protests to the United States State Department, saying that they did not want to become part of the United States.
The point is that if the Hawaiian Kingdom continues to exist, its existence is in rem. It's not in personam. The Hawaiian existence, the Hawaiian Kingdom doesn't exist solely in the opinion of Mr. Larson.
Right. But that existence should not be dependent upon an occupier, because you basically put the occupier on an equal footing with the Hawaiian Kingdom in its own territory. So really what needs to be addressed is what came before the occupation. In a summary, from 1840, the Hawaiian Kingdom possessed a constitutional government with elected and appointed officials and a complete system of civil and criminal laws to govern Hawaiian territory. On April 8, 1842, King Kamehameha III and Privy Council commissions 3 envoys to secure international recognition of Hawaiian independence. And these individuals are Timoteo Ha'alilio, William Richards, and Sir George Simpson. On December 19, 1842, Hawaiian envoys secured United States President Tyler's recognition of Hawaiian independence. November 28, 1843, the British government and the French government formally enter into a declaration recognizing Hawaiian independence. In our pleadings, we refer to that as the 1843 Anglo-Franco Proclamation. From that point, Hawaii has had its statehood recognized as being independent. As such, it began to enter into these treaties: Austria-Hungary, Denmark, France, Germany, Great Britain, Italy, Japan, Netherlands, Russia, Spain, and the United States of America. International recognition is evidence that the Hawaiian Kingdom had diplomatic representatives as of 1893 from those countries, as far as consulates and embassies.
How can we be the 50th state when it never actually legally happened? So I began researching, and I wondered, are there other ways that a country can become a part of another country? And I found that there's no evidence that shows that a domestic joint resolution passed by Congress can actually have jurisdiction in another country. So what the United States did was pass a domestic resolution for the United States that shouldn't have any impact beyond the borders of the United States, just like how the bills that I pass don't have an effect beyond the borders of Hawaii County. So the United States passing a resolution annexing Hawaii would be synonymous to our Hawaii County passing a bill annexing Maui or Kauai or even another country, and then saying, now our laws apply to you and we get your tax money. We know that's not legally possible. I researched President Cleveland's addresses to Congress. I read the various reports to him from his investigators and the treaties between the Hawaiian Kingdom and the United States. So Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution says, treaties shall be the supreme law of the land. And the second paragraph describes how all representatives and legislators shall be bound by oath to support this Constitution. And that is where my oath comes from, to support and defend the United States Constitution. While I was doing this research, I received an email from an agency that claimed to be the Acting Council of Regency of the Hawaiian Kingdom. And within this email, there were various legal documents. And one of them included a link to the case repository of the Permanent Court of Arbitration that referred to a case titled Lance Larson versus the Hawaiian Kingdom, where the Permanent Court of Arbitration, the International Permanent Court of Arbitration, acknowledged the Hawaiian Kingdom as a state, which internationally means country. Just like the United States, Canada, or France, the Hawaiian Kingdom, same rights, same responsibilities. Also included in the email was a document from the UN Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner, Dr. Alfred Desaias, that was sent to circuit court judges in Hawaii. I have come to understand that the lawful political status of the Hawaiian Islands is that of a sovereign nation-state in continuity, but a nation-state that is under a strange form of occupation by the United States resulting from an illegal military occupation and fraudulent annexation. As such, international laws, the Hague and Geneva Conventions, require that the governance and legal matters within the occupied territory of the Hawaiian Islands must be administered by the application of the laws of the occupied state. In this case, the Hawaiian Kingdom, not the domestic laws of the occupier, the United States. So this struck me because this is what Dr. Tsai's presentation had outlined as far as the fraudulent annexation and there not being a treaty between the Hawaiian Kingdom and the United States. And it also struck me because it's talking about administering laws. And as a lawmaker, that's what I do. I'm a United States lawmaker, apparently living in the Hawaiian Kingdom. So I sought to verify the claims that Dr. Desaias made in his memorandum. I researched the Hague and Geneva Conventions, and I discovered that these are treaties, many of which the United States is a part of. I also found Title 18 of United States Code, Section 2441, that specifies any violation of these treaties constitute a war crime. And again, Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution, where my oath comes from, says that treaties shall be the supreme law of the land. And again, Title 18 says a war crime is any violation of these treaties. And the articles I believe that Dr. Desaias is referring to is Article 43 of the Hague Convention and Article 64 of the Geneva Convention. And both of these describe how the penal laws of the occupied territory shall remain in force. which means we should be following Hawaiian Kingdom law, not United States law, if in fact the Hawaiian Kingdom is occupied. I read academic publications and research, much of which was authored by Dr. Keanu Sai. It took me probably 30 minutes to an hour of each page because they're so dense, and the concepts, the legal concepts, I had a law dictionary right next to me, and I was constantly having to research and verify different aspects of the history that he was referring to. And I began to take it more and more seriously, and it became a question to me if, in my capacity as a lawmaker, if I could be liable for violating international law and be liable for what United States law refers to as war crimes. So I decided to hire an attorney to help me draft a letter to my county attorney. And I hired an attorney because I wanted to make sure that my question that I posed would be properly addressed and receive proper consideration, and that I was able to articulate all of my concerns and the evidence in a way that would require him to address them. So I worked with my attorney and I drafted a letter. It was about 11 pages with almost 400 pages of attachments to our corporation counsel, also known as our county attorney. And I brought it to our first meeting in which I put all of this together, and I started to be concerned. And I announced that I would be refraining from voting until the county attorney could assure me that I would not be incurring criminal liability for violating international law.
We all received an email in June from the acting council of Regency. They informed us of three important actions.
Right, but so what is your position?
My position is that I will be refraining from participating in legislating until Mr. Kamehameha can assure me that I'm not incurring criminal liability under international law and federal law.
Okay, well then, that being the case, this is only my opinion. She cannot vote yes or no, and I mean, I would urge you to just ignore that, quite frankly. But that being the case, if you're going to take the position that you're going to wait for something from Mr. Kamehameha, something formal, you shouldn't even be participating in it. It's odd. You cannot even sit here.
The rule of law also provides the opportunity for the politics to be exposed, right? When you understand the rules and when you understand the law and the procedure, it's easy for you to identify when people start to walk away from those procedures. It's easy for you to identify that a particular person is strapped with a certain kind of politics, right, which is not going to allow them to follow the rule at this particular point.
Inasmuch as Ms. Ruggles has retained services of her private attorney, whose opinions are contrary to what you had told us verbally yesterday, I would say don't put anything in writing. I don't want to, think poorly of Ms. Ruggles, but I think it's not out of the realm of possibilities that they're trying to set up your office. I would say just stay out of it. Let her make the first move. She's got to make that move.
The takeaway from yesterday's meeting is twofold. One, whatever response that I'm going to give her would be what was discussed here. So it's to be rather limited.
The next morning, the county attorney sent me an email in which he gave me 1.5 sentences in his response. He said, in response to your inquiry, we opine that you will not incur any criminal liability under federal or international law. And then in parentheses, he said, see Article 6, international law cannot violate federal law. That's all he said. And Article 6, what's interesting about that is Article 6 is exactly where my concern was coming from, because that's the article that says treaties are the supreme law of the land, and that's where my oath of office comes from. And I went to Article 6, and nowhere does it say federal law cannot violate international law. My attorney cannot even make sense of that. He says Article 6 doesn't say that. Furthermore, I wanted him to assure me. The legal definition of assure is to put certain beyond all doubt. And the county attorney did not put certain beyond all doubt that I would not be incurring criminal liability for violating international law. It was a conclusionary statement unsupported by any facts and analysis. Furthermore, he has given me opinions in the past that were comprehensive. They included case law, facts and analysis. I was expecting him to show me how Hawaii is actually legally a part of the United States. I was expecting him to dispute that the Hague and Geneva Conventions actually apply and outline how I wouldn't be incurring criminal liability. Instead, it appears he dismissed all of the evidence that I had and just issued this blanket statement, half of which isn't substantiated in the article that he refers to. So I actually wanted to continue to attend the council meetings and just abstain from voting until Corporation Counsel could assure me that I wouldn't be incurring criminal liability for voting.
Ms. Ruggles is not going to reconsider her position, and she's going to wait for a formal opinion from Mr. Kamala Miller. And as a member of this body, I got to ask her. I'm going to object to her being here. And I really don't want to take that position because I've asked you several times, please just reconsider your position. If that's the case, she should not even be sitting.
Thank you, Mr. Chung. Thank you, Mr. Kamala. So, Ms. Ruggles, our rules do not allow us to defer a decision. We either have to vote yes or no. No abstention allowed. Given that situation, as a personal courtesy, we can excuse you from council chambers until pending you are comfortable in moving forward. Is that your wish?
If that is my only option, then that's my only course of action to take. So I will be excusing myself until I receive a response from Mr. Kanamana.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Ruggles. So for the record, she'll be excused. So we have.
Under the council rules, the chair of the council at the time, Councilmember Valerie Poindexter, had to approve of my reason for abstaining, in which she denied my ability to abstain. And she said that if I was going to be present, silence would be considered a yes vote. So my only option was to not attend the meetings. I was surprised at the response by the other council members, as they were also very dismissive. We had all received that email from the Acting Council of Regency, and the documents within that email were from legitimate authorities. The UN Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner, the Permanent Court of Arbitration. I was surprised that none of the council members even wanted to hold Corporation Counsel accountable for providing me an actual proper legal memorandum, and that the evidence that I had provided didn't even substantiate the discussion of having a discussion about it, that they're not even curious to see what he has to say about what the Human Rights High Commissioner said about there being a fraudulent annexation and illegal occupation. The fact that they weren't even curious at all what our legal justification was for just ignoring that. How are we still upholding our oaths of office in this situation when Article 6 says treaties are the supreme law of the land, and in 1893, President Cleveland stated that the stated that the United States had committed an act of war against the Hawaiian Kingdom in 1893. How are we not still in a time of war when no treaty of peace has been reached?
Finally, since she has chosen voluntarily to leave this board and is questioning the legitimacy of this board and the County of Hawaii, the State of Hawaii, and the United States of America, I'm going to have to ask the chairperson to at least consider, you don't have to do it, withhold her pay.
So instead of focusing on a dialogue about the law and the facts, the media and the other council members focused on how I wasn't doing my job by not attending meetings, and my salary, how my district no longer had representation, and I was being negligent in my duties and that I should resign and pay back all of my salary, instead of focusing on the fact that Corporation Counsel did not assure me that the United States isn't actually occupying Hawaii right now. The media framed my action to be as if I was associated with some sovereignty group. And a lot of the times they said that. In fact, Corporation Counsel, the county attorney, said that himself before he had even read my letter. When I told him that I had sent him the letter and that I would be refraining from voting, he said, "Oh, it seems Ms. Ruggles is associated with some sovereignty movement or some sovereignty group." And I'm not, and I have never been.
I've heard what Councilmember Ruggles had talked about, and then this is the first time that I'm hearing that she needed a formal opinion, but a lot of these claims is coming from Hawaiian sovereignty groups.
They were also alluding to me being a lunatic. They were making it about my father. And I was still in my office every single day, serving as a liaison between my constituents and the departments, because really legislating is a very small part of our jobs as council members. My office got calls every day, 20 calls a day, 20 emails on various issues, none of which have anything to do with lawmaking. They're more have to do with small infrastructure issues or issues that they're having with law enforcement, the roads, parks, water spigots not working, complaints that they have with different departments. And so I served as a liaison, and I continued to serve as a liaison for my constituents between the departments for various issues that had nothing to do with international law or war crimes. And many of my constituents experienced that I was still there for them in many ways, even if I wasn't voting on legislation. I think that the type of dialogue that we could have had would have been one of presenting different facts. I would imagine we would need to get the state attorney general involved, all the way up to the Department of Justice. I wanted to see what they had to say about the UN Human Rights Memorandum. What is the Office of the High Commissioner of the United Nations Human Rights Office missing? If he's claiming that there was a fraudulent annexation and there's an illegal occupation and we need to be administering the laws of the Hawaiian Kingdom, what does the United States have to say to this?
Keanu has an interesting way of explaining this. He often describes himself as a conservative radical, right? Or something along those lines. Like, if you think what Keanu is ultimately asking for, what he's asking the world to do, what he's asking the international community to do, is not that radical at all, right? It's very conservative. He's asking them to comply with the law. Not make new law, to comply with the existing law. To comply. Hawaii is occupied. Please enforce the laws of occupation, right? Like, all he's really saying at its core, follow the law, please. And the list of people who have followed the law and then got hammered for complying is long. Lance Larson, following Hawaiian Kingdom law, no law for license plates, removes the license plates, gets arrested, gets 30 days in jail, 7 days solitary confinement for quote-unquote complying with Hawaiian Kingdom law. Right? Jen Ruggles, complying with the law, following American law, citing American law, saying American law compels me to take this action. I take this action and ask for an answer, and I get character assassination. I get people attacking my character, not answering the question.
Ask for legal representation, right? Ask the United States or the corporate council, right, of Hawaii County to provide a response, right? What is the status of Hawaii? And just the fact that we're starting to see public officials, right, representatives who hold seats, public servant seats within the state of Hawaii, start to ask these questions, kind of lets you know that we're in some different times here. This history of Hawaii as an illegally occupied, albeit internationally recognized sovereign state, of course collides with the narrative that the state of Hawaii government usually puts out there.
Ruggles is one who has not dismissed it. She's really taken it seriously and then done her homework as far as following up on what is the actual meaning and what are the implications of this history. Because history is how we got here. And the interesting thing about her is that she's looked through the framework of her oath of public office. That is where she's found the potential criminal liability that she may have incurred, because it's interesting because never mind all of the Hawaiian history, never mind what the kingdom would have said about this, it's just right there in state and county government. There is a violation of the Constitution, which incorporates international treaties, including treaties with the Hawaiian Kingdom.
Article 29 of the Geneva Convention specifies what an agent is. And according to Article 29, an agent would include a civil servant. And so, according to the Geneva Convention, as a civil servant, as an elected official for the United States, that means that I am an agent for the United States. And the Hague and Geneva Conventions outline what my responsibilities are. So my role shifted from being a legislator for the United States to being an agent of the United States under the United States signed treaties, the Hague and Geneva Conventions. So I began to put every other agent and every other agency of the United States in Hawaii on notice for what appears to be violations of the Hague and Geneva Conventions and rights of protected persons being violated. And I started with Queen's Hospital. In this case, Queen Emma had established free healthcare for Aboriginal Hawaiians. And this was a right afforded to all Aboriginal Hawaiians in Hawaii to receive free healthcare. And when the United States came and overthrew the government, they manipulated the charter so that Aboriginal Hawaiians would now have to pay. And this is a direct violation of Article 50 of the Hague Convention, so I sent a letter explaining everything to Queen's Hospital.
Jennifer also pointed out to the good folks at Queen's that Hawaiians should be treated free of charge, because that's in the founding charter. All of this was removed after the overthrow.
I sent letters to all circuit court judges concerning foreclosure proceedings in Hawaii regarding the rights of protected persons. Article 46 of the Hague Convention and Article 47 specifically prohibit pillaging and confiscation of property from protected persons. I sent a letter to every department regarding taxation in Hawaii regarding pillaging. I sent a letter to President Trump and Majority Speaker of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, and Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, regarding unlawful and wanton appropriation of property in Hawaii, which appeared to be in violation of Article 43 of the Hague Convention and 147 of the Geneva Convention, and how many trillions of dollars have gone and left and have been taken from the Hawaiian Kingdom. I sent letters to the Supreme Court judges in Hawaii regarding extensive destruction of property on Mauna Kea, and I cited several articles of the Hague and Geneva Conventions that apply, and actually other international laws.
Destruction of a public monument, when they're faced with the destruction of burial grounds, cultural site, religious site, when they're faced with the destruction of an object held in veneration by society.
We have to just say one thing is to let everybody know, all of you, we have nothing against you, but because there is no treaty of annexation, we are under illegal occupation, and by exercising the laws and actions of the illegal occupier, all of you could be held accountable for war crimes. And as long as we said that, now you cannot say you never know. And all we're trying to do is protect you as much as to protect us. But if you're going to commit that action, then you're going to be held accountable. And we're sorry.
You look into the recent actions taking place with the court case with the Molokai fishermen, educate yourselves, and you will see what we are talking about.
And there's a connection to the Molokai fishermen's case recently on Maui, when the court essentially took judicial notice as a result of our expert witness testimony, Dr. Keanu Sai, as well as his legal brief concerning the continuity of the Hawaiian Kingdom and the legitimacy of the acting government.
Respectfully, the court is of the view that based on everything that's been presented, that the court does have subject matter jurisdiction.
And thank you. I would ask, because we did make the request and it's provided for in the motion itself, as well as the authorities, that the court take judicial notice of the matters that were presented in the motion itself.
What's the prosecution's position? All right, then the court will take, there being no objection, the court will take judicial notice as requested in writing on the documents.
That judicial notice taken by the courts essentially affirmed what we've been saying for so long, that the Hawaiian Kingdom continues to exist with the attributes of a state sovereign nature. And because the Hawaiian Kingdom continues to exist, the state of Hawaii, their judicial system, all of this really is a continued illegal act. And that awareness is growing.
During the time that I had refrained from voting and began to understand and act on my duty as an agent for the United States, the National Education Association came out with 3 articles. And the National Education Association for the United States is America's largest labor union of educators. The HSTA, Hawaii Teachers Association, is the Hawaii affiliate chapter. And as a whole, the NEA has over 3 million members. And they published 3 articles describing the illegal occupation of the United States in the Hawaiian Kingdom. I mean, America's main educational association is saying that according to the facts and the law, the Hawaiian Kingdom is being illegally occupied right now.
In his book, Nation Within, The History of the American Occupation of Hawaii, Tom Kaufman, the author, writes, I am compelled to add that the continued relevance of this book reflects a far-reaching political, moral, and intellectual failure of the United States to recognize and deal with its takeover of Hawaii. our investigative team set out to the University of Hawaii to discover how students felt about what Kaufman called the intellectual failure of the United States to recognize and deal with its takeover of Hawaii.
I am not super familiar with how one country becomes like a part of another country. It's been a while since I've taken any kind of history or like world cultures kind of studies.
It really depends on the situation. Usually, like, it could be annexed or, yeah, like, it could be taken over. It depends. Yeah, that's pretty much all I know about it. Yeah.
So I believe that when one country wants to make another country part of its own territory, that is called annexation. And I believe that they need to have, I know documents are needed to be signed in order to completely annex something, but other than that, I don't know anything else.
I don't really know too much about how a country becomes another country.
I haven't learned much about how Hawaii became part of the United States. I don't know, I guess like the US just like kind of came and kind of took over. I don't know.
From my understanding, after Pearl Harbor, they didn't have the military that they needed, so we kind of stepped in, and eventually, from what I understand, we kind of just took over. I don't know if that's true or not.
I know that Hawaii became part of America because it was basically, we had businesses to create money and wealth, as well as we were strategically like well placed for military operations. That's why Pearl Harbor became Pearl Harbor, because we're right in the Pacific, and it would, you know, be able to. It was good strategy, I guess, and I know that it was forced upon Queen Liliuokalani to basically sign over, you know, the rights, her rights to, you know, her land and everything like that. That's kind of the quick version of what I know. I know there's a lot more to it, but I know that she was basically like forced to give up what she had.
What is the word? Annexed Hawaii, or held Queen Liliuokalani at gunpoint and made her sign a bunch of documents, and signed a bunch of documents with a bunch of people with money. So I'm familiar with that story. I don't agree with Hawaii being part of the United States. I wouldn't call it part of the United States. I got here a year ago, and first thing I thought to myself was, like, I'm in a foreign country. I'm not in the United States of America.
I have come to understand that the lawful political status of the Hawaiian Islands is that of a sovereign nation-state in continuity.
In continuity. But a nation-state that is under a strange form of occupation by the United States, resulting from an illegal military occupation
by the United States, resulting from an illegal military occupation and a fraudulent annexation.
Resulting from an illegal military occupation and a fraudulent annexation. As such, international laws, the Hague and Geneva Conventions, require that governance and legal matters within the occupied territory of the Hawaiian Islands must be administered.
That governance and legal matters within the occupied territory of the Hawaiian Islands must be administered.
Hague and Geneva Conventions require the governance and legal matters within the occupied territory of the Hawaiian Islands must be administered by the application of the laws of the occupied states.
And legal matters within the occupied territory of the Hawaiian Islands must be administered by the application of the laws of the occupied state, not domestic laws of the occupier.
Ones must be administered by the application of the laws of the occupied state, in this case the Hawaiian Kingdom, not the domestic laws of the occupier, the United States.
But not the domestic laws of the occupier, the United States. Okay. So I kind of get what that means. It's like basically they don't have the right to just take something, the United States doesn't just have the right to take something even if they, enforce their will upon the place, that it's, Hawaii still always has like a choice.
They've determined that Hawaii is not necessarily just its own nation state, but it's being occupied by like the United States, because it said like resulting from an illegal military occupation. So the United States came into Hawaii, the Hawaiian Islands, and took over illegally. And so because of that, the laws from the Hague and Geneva Conventions required that like all the legal matters that happen within the Hawaiian Islands have to happen according to laws of the Hawaiian Kingdom and not the United States. I think that's what I'm gathering from it.
I am compelled to add that the continued relevance of this book reflects a far-reaching political, moral, and intellectual failure of the United States to recognize and deal with its takeover of Hawaii. So he's pretty much like in shock, I guess, of like the situation at hand, and that like he's kind of saying like what I thought originally, like how like a matter of morality or not, in a sense of was this the right way that we were annexed as a state into Hawaii, or should it have gone down in another way?
I've heard that passed around, like people have said that, but I never knew exactly what that meant. Like there was no annex, because I thought I had learned what was right, that there was at least something side, even if it was forceful. But you can always learn a little more.
Yeah, I mean, how does this stuff get so lost for so long that it takes tribes or nations or people so long to be able to assert themselves? Well, in this case, you've got the whole legal apparatus from the United States sitting on these islands.
Like we came here and forced them to obey our laws and give up their culture. That's what I'm getting from this.
Is it illegal? Yes. Is it unfortunate? Yes. And is it going to take a lot of work to change that? Yes. And I support, even if it meant I'd have to leave, I support that.
I haven't really learned much about the whole Hawaii-United States relationship.
I think that the university could do a lot more in educating us on what's going on, Being ignorant to the fact of what really happened is just as insulting as what we did.
I think that the university could take steps to better educate its students by maybe having a class requirement to graduate. I think no one really wants classes added to their schedule, but I believe that a Hawaiian history class would be a nice touch for a Hawaiian university, because people coming from the mainland kind of want a taste of what Hawaii is, and I think that'd be a nice addition.
Reflects a far-reaching political, moral, and intellectual failure of the United States to recognize and deal with its takeover of Hawaii. I like that take on it. Like, the fact that this kind of text is still, it's still relevant and it's still applicable, backs up the fact that the United States isn't willing to, recognize that they did something wrong in taking over Hawaii, illegally. They're not willing to deal with it.
Why isn't this, spoken about more? And what can people of Hawaii do to speak out and make it more known about in the community, especially toward powerful politicians and people of power, and bring it more aware with people who could actually do something, Yeah.
I always knew that what we did here was wrong. I never knew how deep it was. But this seems wrong. what we did seems wrong by reading this. And I think more people should know about this. It's a blessing to be here. I'm from Sacramento, California. This is a blessing to be here. But for our government to come here and make it their government doesn't add up. Doesn't make any sense.
Ralph Nader once said that whatever students want, whatever causes student support, those causes always win. And that might sound overly optimistic, but I think the reason why that's true is a pretty pessimistic reason, which is that the people in power, they simply die or they go out of power, and then the younger generation with the new ideas takes their place, and then they make the changes that they want to see. So it's difficult to make change within a generation, but change between generations is almost inevitable. That's what we might see with this information as well. That's where education, again, it always comes up to the top as the important priority.
So there's a lot of work to be done, which is fascinating, and but it's also sometimes a little frustrating. But step by step, we're going in the right direction, so I'm quite optimistic. But the loss was immense, absolutely immense. And when you speculate what kind of a Hawaii we could have today, if the Queen had been allowed to remain on the throne, it would be a marvelous country, clearly.
You're so lucky someone took you over, as if you were so backwards to begin with. As if we didn't, and now we're going back to that, as if you didn't have electricity before the White House, as if you didn't have opera houses, as if you didn't have universal male suffrage, as if you didn't have a functioning government that had laws that were for the benefit of all the people, not specific minorities, not specific special interests. Like, it goes back to an understanding of what the kingdom was, right? And if you have no clue of what the kingdom was, then of course you're going to think, oh, so lucky. But if you know what the kingdom was, you're like, oh, we went backwards. Not oh, so lucky. You set us back, right? Like, you constrained us. Imagine what we would have been had you not been here.
The history concerning 1893, right, and the actions of Queen Liliuokalani, the legal actions in particular, right, her diplomacy at that time. It's because of her actions, because of her understanding of international law, Hawaiian Kingdom law, U.S. domestic law, and the actions that she took, the procedures that we took, that even in 2019, there is a watertight legal argument, right, here in Hawaii, right? There is a bulletproof legal argument in Hawaii that is predicated on a continuity of Hawaiian sovereignty, right? And that the United States doesn't have legal jurisdiction in Hawaii.
Liberty and justice for all. I mean, every council meeting we would have to say the Pledge of Allegiance. With liberty and justice for all. And what is justice? I mean, and in America we define justice by laws. And if we can't even produce the law that justifies us being in Hawaii, what does liberty and justice for all mean?
You start to really, I think, understand the magnitude of the situation, right? That for the first time, people are coming to the realization in their own individual and personal ways that they've been lied to in some capacity or another, which leads people to make documentaries, right, and films like yourself, or others like myself to go and get a PhD, right, to further explore a history of Hawaii that somehow missed, right, in our schooling, in our education. But nonetheless, I would tie, I think, all of this public commentary back to the importance of Hawaiian scholarship and research, right? That is having, I think, a big impact on what we're talking about now and where Hawaii will be headed in the future.
My doctoral dissertation focuses on the continuity of the Hawaiian Kingdom, beginning to right the wrong. That has been transformed into a history book that is now a required text in high schools and college classes. We also have a plethora of master's theses, doctoral dissertations, law journal articles, peer review articles, publications. HawaiianKingdom.org/blog. You have the latest updates. The greatest thing here is there's nothing to join. It's just get educated. Talk to your family. Start normalizing things. That's all it is. I'm not here to get you to join anything. I got enough to take care of my family.
And a lot of people were asking me, what was I seeking during this process? And my answer is very simple. I was seeking compliance. I wanted to comply with the law.
Hope that when a people are singled out for destruction because of their heritage and religious faith, and we can do something about it, the world will not look the other way.
The very idea that individuals hold obligations under international law was long recognized before World War II, but typically only states could be held accountable for violations committed by their agents. The Nuremberg judgment marked a tipping point. It affirmed the capacity of individuals to commit crimes and, most fundamentally, the distinction between the responsibility of states and the responsibility of individuals.
Hat Ihnen Hitler ausdrücklich verboten.
It held that crimes against international law are committed by men, not by abstract entities, and that only by punishing individuals who commit such crimes can the provisions of international law be enforced. The principle of individual criminal responsibility has particular importance in mass atrocity contexts. It seeks to prevent formal assignment of blame or guilt to collectivities, such as entire nations, societies, or whole ethnic and religious groups. This rationale was in particular invoked by the Yugoslavia Tribunal. It treated international criminal justice as an instrument to mitigate feelings of resentment, hatred, and frustration.
It will clearly be much more costly and dangerous to stop later than this effort to prevent it from going further now.
The stark reality was that these courts would be the international community's frontal assault on impunity, and often had to begin their work amidst ongoing atrocities.